Mental Health Momentum, a Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the director of mental health awareness at Silicon Slopes. Here at Silicon Slopes, we recognize the impact of mental health issues on workers, leaders, and businesses as a whole. On this podcast, we facilitate discussions about mental health with the goal to increase understanding and find solutions to achieve greater stability and resilience. I'd like to introduce my guest on the podcast today, Eric, and now I forgot to ask how to pronounce his name. Engebretsen?
It's Engebretsen.
Eric Engebretsen.
Yes. You know, you're the first person that's ever got it wrong.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Eric Engebretsen is the co-founder at Bloom, which is a social impact staffing company. Their mission is to improve people's standards of living in emerging markets through remote work. In 3 years, they've grown to employ more than 2,000 people worldwide who more than double their income on average, while providing a new age alternative to outsourcing and working with international teams for fast-growing companies in the United States. Prior to co-founding Bloom, Eric worked for one of the largest international hiring technology companies based in San Francisco. He graduated from Brigham Young University in business management with an emphasis in entrepreneurship and enjoys traveling, skiing, and being active outside with his wife and 2 sons. Eric, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
We were talking a little bit earlier about how you started in San Francisco. So where's the closest skiing to San Francisco?
I mean, it's Tahoe. Yeah. And what's funny, though, is that I've always had the Icon Pass. And even though Tahoe is, a 3-hour drive, I would just fly back here to Utah and ski because the snow here is better. I love the resorts here.
The greatest snow on earth, right?
They're not lying. Yeah. So even though it was a 3-hour drive to Tahoe, it was a hour and a half flight to Utah. And that was usually where I came back to ski.
When we moved back here, and I noticed those strange contraptions at the Salt Lake International Airport, and these big, huge, where you get your luggage. I thought, what in the world is that for? And I figured that was for skis.
Yep, that was me. I was that guy pulling the ski bag off there.
Nice.
So yeah, happy to be back, and nice that I can just zip up to the resorts now.
Yes. Well, tell us a little bit about your family and your background, and maybe any interest you had in mental health.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm local here to Utah, grew up in Provo. As mentioned in my bio, I have 2 sons. What wasn't mentioned there is that I have 2 more on the way.
Oh.
So we're doubling production in our household.
How old are your first 2?
I have a 4-year-old and almost a 2-year-old.
And twins on the way?
Twins on the way.
So we'll have 4. Going to be outgunned really quick.
We are 4 under 5 this fall. So stay tuned for that. Yeah. It's going to be crazy. But yeah, so that's a little bit about the family. My wife and I met at BYU. And much of my entrepreneurial story and even mental health, it's such, I think, a joint thing with your partner, but couldn't do what I'm doing without her. So love her to death and grateful for her and all she does.
I imagine having twins was a surprise?
Oh, for sure.
Or getting pregnant with twins,
it's funny. So it runs in her family. Okay. So it was a surprise, but she actually called it, which is really unique. She was more sick than usual, and she's like, I think there might be 2 in there. So we literally went in just to find that out. And so we sit down with the technician there, and he's like, so you guys have any concerns? She's like, no, I just want to see if there's 2. And he puts the ultrasound thing on her stomach, and yeah, there's 2 right there. And so she called the shot.
Is it boy and girl?
It's boy, girl.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my daughter-in-law is a fraternal twin.
Oh, nice.
And she raves about it. She says that there's just such a unique connection with a twin.
Yeah.
And in fact, they recently moved just to be able to be closer to her brother.
There you go.
For a time, just because she misses him. And
cool.
So that's cool.
It'll be an adventure. Yeah, we're excited.
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
Tell me about Bloom, about the business. Just tell listeners about kind of what it is. We described a little bit in the bio, and how'd you get the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea and the origin of it resonates with a lot of the Utah ecosystem. So coming back from a mission in Argentina, I was deeply changed by that experience, and wanted to do something for years while I was at BYU to get back to that part of the world, to impact those people, to work with that demographic again, and feel kind of some of the same feelings I felt as a missionary. And so that's really the idea. Like, if you've read anything in the news, you've seen about Argentina's hyperinflation issues and headlines, and every kind of different country in Latin America and other parts of the world have similar headlines, just a different flavor, right? Just a different headline. And so that was the idea. Just wanted to do something to help people I came to know and love as a missionary there. And that was my co-founder as well. He served in Peru, and we grew up together as friends. So it was just a couple of years at BYU, and then beyond of ideating of, hey, we really want to do something, should we move down there? Should we try this? Should we try that? We tried 2 or 3 businesses that didn't work. and then eventually realized, hey, like remote work is taking off. I
Mhm.
started a job with a tech company, that did remote hiring, international hiring, and learned kind of the ins and outs of that space, and realized like this is taking off everywhere. That's probably a way we can help people in that
Was
part of the
that
world.
pre-COVID that
It
you were
was
having
right
those
during
ideas?
COVID.
Okay.
Yeah, this was 2020, 2021. So that's what obviously it was taking off here,
Sure. Yeah.
and that's what kind of prompted and spurred those ideas was, this could probably be the way. And then what that's evolved into is, we helped some of the first people from our missions get remote jobs, and they tripled their income
Right.
and had
Right.
everything in their life changed. We're talking about mental health here. Like everything good and important in their life was benefited, from their mental health and that stability of not having to worry about, where food's coming tomorrow or whatever that may be, to having a better work environment, to making more money, and, some of those components to it. And then what that's evolved into is Bloom today, like I mentioned in my bio, we're an alternate to outsourcing. So that
Okay.
word has been here in the U.S. for decades now. And typically people think about when they hear that word outsourcing, that time they've had a customer service experience,
Sure.
right? And they can't understand the person on the other end. And so what our business is, it's more like insourcing. So instead of sending out work overseas, we insource or embed our staff, our team members directly into our client companies here in the US. So it is this alternative where you get to work with folks overseas, but you get to feel like they're a part of your remote team.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So is the focus then, are most of your employees from abroad?
Yeah, they're
Okay.
all
Oh,
abroad.
they're all abroad.
Yeah, except
Okay.
for our corporate team and our internal team. But yes, as mentioned in the bio, we employ about 2,000 people today that are all in emerging markets, Latin
Nice.
America, Africa, Southeast Asia, the South Pacific, Eastern Europe.
I love that concept of just of trying to help someone better their life, because if you can do that, that becomes like the hinge point for that generation, right? And for
For sure.
generations to come.
Absolutely.
I remember my dad was the first person in his family that went to college, because they were just farmers before that.
Yep.
And so my dad went to college and graduated, and then that kind of inspired us. When we were growing up, that was just kind of the expectation, right? It was
course.
like, well, we go to college because mom and dad went to college.
Of course.
And so we all went to college, and then my children all went to college,
Of
and
course.
and it just there. So there needs to be some kind of inflection point where that happens.
Yeah.
And in these emerging markets, sometimes that's hard to accomplish because
It's really
there's-
hard to accomplish.
Yeah, there's not as many
Yeah.
opportunities.
For sure. I mean, you think about like most staffing businesses like ours do not have a mission statement or a purpose
Right,
like ours, right? And so I think about that same story for my family. And I think most Americans probably have that person they look to, but it was my great grandfather that immigrated here from Norway and gave me that last name that you wonderfully pronounced at the beginning of this. But, came
I'm not gonna
here,
try it again, yeah.
broken English, no education at a U.S. standard. And the next generation was impacted. My grandpa, right, went on to be a lawyer and college educated and a CFO, and it's just one generation to the next. And
Yeah.
so we're trying to do that same thing, but without people having to immigrate here. We want to have that, enable them to break into the online economy so that their kids grow up in a home where they see mom and dad educated, working online.
Right.
That's the norm, and know they can do the same in this global economy that we now find ourselves living in.
It's an interesting parallel to mental health, because I find the same thing happen. A lot of people, they'll ask, well, it's my mental health is genetic because my mom is this way, my dad is this way. And then there's always the question of, well, is it genetic, or is it because that's what you experienced the whole time growing up?
Yes.
Was seeing examples of poor mental health. But as soon as someone makes that transition and achieves better, greater emotional stability, then they pass that on to their kids.
Yeah.
Either, I'm sure, obviously their biology doesn't change, but the influence of the environment is so significant.
Huge.
So yeah, someone needs to make that
For sure.
that change.
Well, maybe before we move away from that, let me tell you an experience I had in Kumasi, Ghana, like 2 or 3 months ago. This is the second biggest city in Ghana. And I met with a guy who's really educated. He's a graphic designer and a videographer, so he has a formal education by Ghanaian standards. But I was sitting in his home. He's now worked for us for, I don't know, it's probably close to a year now at this point. But sitting in his home, and he's just telling me like the mental shift in his mind of going from every night having to be out hustling, finding the next gig, finding the next job, to now stable job.
Yeah.
And so he's like getting emotional, breaking down as he's telling us this, of like, I think his exact words were, I never thought it would be possible, or I never thought I'd see the day where I could expect to come home and have dinner with my wife and kid. Right? Where it's like, it's literally just it's the mindset. It's like, it's the, not even the mindset, but it's like the psychology of, that the paycheck is coming. You have something stable. You have something, a good environment. Whereas much of the world lives in this informal economy where you don't know where the next meal is coming from. And that is a huge burden, a huge toll mentally.
Right.
It's that, like, we've seen that, and it was special to see that firsthand. And I always think about his story.
Well, and I love that your business, that was its prevailing motivation from the beginning,
Yes.
right? It wasn't like you kind of, oh, we could probably do this as well. It was like, how can we help people improve their quality of life?
Right.
What kind of business could we create that's going to help people improve the quality of their life?
Yep.
And then you discovered it from there. That's probably backwards from the way most
Yes.
businesses
And, well,
started.
and honestly, fortunately, it was the great business as well. Like we have a
Right, right.
great timed business, right? Like an innovation in this stagnant outsourcing space. But it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have that motivation, because I wasn't looking for a great business. I wasn't looking to make a quick buck. It was truly just, hey, we care about this. We are thinking for years critically about this problem, and saw the opportunity when it arose before many people did.
Yeah. So my I have a couple sons who worked remotely exclusively during COVID.
Yeah.
And then, like many businesses, they're saying, okay, you got to come back to the office now. If at the very least, some sort of hybrid schedule, if not back in the office full time. And I've heard sometimes people saying that maybe they're worried about the effect that remote work is going to have on people.
Sure.
But I also know that one of my sons thrived in remote work as well. Have you seen any connections between like remote work and an emotional adjustment at all? I mean, either positive or negative?
Yeah, I think it's different for every person, right? I was just at a conference this last week and saw a stat where they said like the vast majority of Gen Zers want to be back in office, right? Because that's their preference of young and in this stage of networking and dating and all of that. So I think it's individual.
Yeah.
Whereas like for our workforce, right, that like the remote job is far better than what they can find in country.
Right.
Like working remotely with a better environment, better team, better company, it's going to far exceed what you can find in person. So I think there's some of those, right? Like, factors that are unique to every person and their preferences, and it can go either way. So I think it's probably up to the individual to say, like, look internally at what are my strengths, what's my personality, what's my, my needs, and make that, decision adjustment based on that. Just like you've seen, it sounds like between the differences in multiple of your sons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The one that preferred and still prefers remote work, that's what he has.
Yeah.
And the other one has, he couldn't wait to get back to the office because that was just kind of his jam. That's what he enjoyed. So yeah, I think that's what I don't like about these kind of one size fits all explanations when they say, oh, well, clearly every single person in this company is going to benefit from this. And I get that you can't, that at some point you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere and say, this is what we're going to do for the company. There can't be 10,000 solutions for 10,000 employees. But it's nice when we can be just a little bit more flexible and say, well, what's going to be best for this individual?
Right.
Because I think as the emotional and mental health adjustment of your employees goes, I mean, so goes the company to a certain extent.
For sure. Yeah. And like I said, I think it's easier said than done here, especially here in the US, where you can go find remote work versus in office and kind of find what caters to you. Coming out of BYU, right? Like I had 100 different options of what to go take, but it's the people that we employ overseas don't necessarily have that luxury. And so, remote work has to be kind of the alternative that we see as it all helps them overcome many other things like the story I described that are harder challenges or worse on their psyche, right?
Right.
We do every year an impact report. I'll share this with you after here. And we can link it even if that's interesting for some of the listeners. But we do an impact report every year where we survey our team members and we figure out how much more are they making on average, and a bunch of other things. And one of them is that kind of mental health, that aspect of like, are you more optimistic working remotely? Are you more hopeful? Mental health, and some of those, I don't remember exactly the way we worded it, but some of that we're trying to be very intentional about it. But at the end of the day, like if you can put food on the table and work remotely, you're going to do it, I think.
Exactly.
And many people obviously prefer it. Yeah.
Is there a lot of the work I do is remote, and I find that I have to be intentional about work-life balance because my office is 4 steps down my hallway, right? And so I can do that. Is there anything that you do as an employer of mostly remote workers? I mean, do you give them education at all, or is that something that's talked about? Just trying to say, hey, when you clock out, you clock out.
For sure. I think for us, like there's like tools for success of when you're on, how do you be on, how do you be successful, right? And then how do you check out a little bit? And what's unique though is that like I think about it as an employer, but then I also think about it as like a worker. My own, I've worked. We started this business 2 years remote. Now we have an office, right? And so there's there is kind of like this, how do I think about my workforce overseas that for the most part, I think will always be remote, at least most of them. But then for me here, I actually go into an office every day. And so I see it both ways. And it's also different as an employee versus as a founder. I think like as an entrepreneur and as a founder, there's certain things that I look back on. I'm like, man, that was not great for my mental health. I worked crazy
Right.
hours, but I'm sure glad I did it
Right.
because like this is something I care deeply about. So it's I have to put on different hats, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about it different ways. Like for myself personally is one thing, and then how to communicate to now a large organization is another. But we definitely have kind of the systems in place to set people up for success when they're on, and then when they're off the clock as well.
And I think as a founder and owner, that's something that's particularly difficult to negotiate because, like you said, you worked crazy hours
Yes.
for the longest time trying to
Yes,
get
and
things
still
going.
do, to be honest.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so what do you do then? I mean, because there's probably listeners who are in your
Yeah.
same situation, startups or whatever,
Yeah.
working 20-hour days to get going.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely peaks and valleys, but we consistently work, 60-hour weeks is like the norm for our executive team because we care deeply about what we do,
Right.
and you have to be intentional to sustain that. And getting this business off the ground, we worked more than that because I worked 2 jobs. I had a W-2 job, and then started this on the side,
Right.
and so it was a lot to take on. And I think as a founder, though, like I said, like it's different because I care so deeply about what we're doing and the way we're doing it that like it doesn't feel like work a lot of the time. There are definitely times that it does and it's not fun. But I think that helps, like something that you're passionate about. I think helps that. But then you've got to be intentional about it. And so for us, like I've had this conversation with my partner of again, like we both care deeply about this. We want to put in a lot of time, but we want to be sustainable at the same time. So we kind of, had this open discussion of like, well, what works for us? So what we landed on is we go into the office early. So I'm in between 6 and 6:30 every day, but I'm out at 4:30 every single day. So I can say, hey, this is where I draw the line in the sand. I care deeply about what we do here from 6 to 4:30, but I care even more about what happens at my house.
Right.
And I want to be there for dinner. I want to be there to put my kids to bed. And so we've intentionally said like, hey, we're going to sacrifice. I'm going to get up at 5 every day so we can go do this because I care deeply about these two things. But then it results in long days. So
Right.
honestly, like I'm still working on it. Like in the last, years that we've been doing this, my exercise habit has gone down and some of those things that just gets harder to do.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure that out as well. But that's where we've landed as far as like, this helps us check out at the time we've said we're going to check out. Sometimes it's hard to turn the brain off and stop
Mhm.
thinking about work things, but try and really be intentional about that so I can spend some quality time with my family, which is a part of our company culture of like, we care deeply about that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think setting that example as a leader is so important as well. If you're telling your employees you need to develop connections, you need to
Yep.
be engaged with people, and you haven't seen your family in a week.
Right.
That's
Right. Well, and the same thing is true of like, and we tell our employees, hey, when we're on, let's be on, right?
Right.
Like when we're here, like most of our team, all of our team here in Utah comes in early as well and leaves early. But then it's like, we're not bugging them after 5 o'clock,
Right.
which is like, that's not true for many companies, right? Where like you're expected to respond to emails, of course, urgent emergency stuff. But for us, it's like be on, work a longer above average day and do great work in that day. But then when 4:30 comes around, we tell everyone like, let's all go, let's go,
Right.
let's beat traffic, let's go home, and let's come back and be ready to put in a great day of work tomorrow as well.
So what you're saying is kind of be present in the current place you're in.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever place that is. If that's
Yeah.
home, then be present with your
Exactly.
family. If that's work, then be
Exactly.
present at work.
Like when be on at work so you can be on at home.
Right.
I think that's
Right.
the way to put it.
I think that's great.
Yep. It's unique. It's unique, but it's fun being able to kind of say, hey, these are things that we care about. This is what's important to us. Let's dictate, policies and culture that actually represent that.
Right. Exactly. I remember talking with someone. I can't remember what business he was working for, but they were trying to kind of improve their mental health culture
Yeah.
at the business, and so there was a lot of signage, there was a lot of,
Yes.
of buzzwords
Yes.
and things like that,
Yes.
which is a great place to start. But he just said he would chronically get the feeling that if he wasn't doing something that he was supposed to be doing, that they were kind of looking across, because the idea was, oh no, take whatever breaks you need. That's important for your mental health, but 20 minutes into a break, people are kind of going, hey, what's this guy doing? Why isn't
Yeah.
he,
Yeah, sure.
why isn't he back at work? And I get it as well from a business perspective, but it's important to, you have to follow that up
You
from
have to
the top
live it.
down.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You have to live it.
And establish the types of policies that you're okay with.
Yep.
And then live within those policies, don't do too less or don't do too much.
Totally agree. And I hope I think we were able to do that because, again, this is kind of starting from us at the top
Right.
of saying, hey, like, this is what we care about. And this is clearly communicated the why we're doing this. It's
Right.
the be on at work so we can be on at home or whatever you want to do, after hours.
There was, this is something I found fascinating. The Surgeon General talked about loneliness and basically called it an epidemic. He
Yeah.
said that it's just something that's really impacting our mental health. That's and one of the things they've said is that we need to develop greater connections with people.
Yeah.
So are you facilitating that as well? I mean, so how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, because for our workforce, right? And again, I'll probably answer this in two ways of like the workforce, the people that I employ, and then also as a founder, because I think it's different. At least it has been for me. But I think for our workforce, fortunately, the environments they're working in are remote. So like the whole team is remote, or most of the team is remote, and so they're interacting, every day with people in a remote manner. They're not sitting in a box somewhere.
Right.
And so being intentional about that, and they've got management and others that they're interacting with. So I think that's an intentional step of like we look for clients to work with. We look for positions that promote that type of environment, because doing something that's not sustainable just isn't going to win in the long run.
Right.
And then I think as a founder, like I've definitely felt that, is again, like trying to get something off the ground, going through the grind, going through like what isn't seen on LinkedIn. It can be lonely, right? I'm sure many people experience that. But one of the best pieces of advice I got was someone told me, I wish it was earlier on in our journey, but someone told me at some point, probably a year ago or something, some really good advice, which was like, you have to disconnect yourself from the business. Because it can feel lonely and isolating to build, but it also can be lonely and isolating just when things are rough, right? Like I think what I've said is some of the most fulfilling and like some of the best moments, in my work life, like in my career, have definitely been through this business and through something that's been a dream of mine, but also some of the lowest for sure.
Yeah.
Like mental health wise, everything. Like I think as a founder, and I never would have expected this coming in, but like, when I pour all of myself into this business, into the branding and the name and the mission and the website and what we do and how we do it, and then when things go wrong or go south or, are hard, it's like, it feels personal. Right. And so that's something I never expected, is that like more than I ever would have imagined, like it had a personal effect on me, and it's gotten better over time for sure. And it's gotten better as I've like intentionally tried to say like, you know what? It's just a business.
Right.
It's something I care deeply about, but there are things that are more important, and that's like helped, lessen that burden. But that's been an interesting one I did not see coming in this topic of mental health and mental wellness.
I remember the very first like real client that I had. We practiced on each other,
Sure.
as we were training, and but I was in a community mental health center, and it was a young woman. And I won't go into detail about what we talked about, but the whole night I laid awake, thinking about how I could help her and this and that. And I remember getting up the next morning after about 2 hours of sleep and thinking, I'm not going to survive in this business. If I do this, that this is with one person after one session. Now multiply that times 40 or whatever. And I decided right then that I did have to make that disconnect as well.
Yes, it's hard, easier said than done.
It's much easier said than done, but I think it's important and to say, and I remember finally getting to the point where I said, if I do a good job today, if I, give good counsel and I'm a good listener and all the things that a good psychologist should do, then I had a successful day, regardless of what my clients did,
Sure.
regardless whether they listened to me or employed the advice or anything like that, because those were things that were outside of my control.
Yep.
I had to say, I'm going to do the things that are within my control, do them as best I can, and then try to improve and do better tomorrow. But yeah, disconnecting that, people have asked me many times since then, they say, how do you have longevity in a career in mental health? And I said, you have to leave it at the office.
Yeah.
You have to go home. And I would tell my clients, I'd say, look, it's nothing personal, but I'm not going to think about you after this just because I can't.
Yeah.
I can't afford to.
Yeah, you got to switch to another.
Exactly. I'll give you everything I've got for this
Right
45 minutes, but then after that, I've got to move on to other things because
Totally.
I got my own life, my own issues. So
Yep.
we've kind of talked about this already, but just last question. So for entrepreneurs, how can they like prioritize self-care and their mental health? What's any ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things I'd reiterate what we've talked about of like drawing the line in the sand of like, when you're going to be on at work, when you're going to be off at work, and so you can be on in other things, and that it plays well into like the disconnect, right? Of like trying to disconnect yourself from your business. But it's way easier said than done. Like there are many, I can think to a period earlier in the business where it's like I was not sleeping well for weeks and weeks because it's just like I can't let things go or can't drop it out of my mind, and it's hard. But I think having that conversation with me, like it's with my co-founder or also as well with my spouse, of like I want to be on when I'm here, when I'm on, I want to be present. So I think having those conversations, writing those things down, like that's the first step. Is like asking yourself, like, what do I care about? What do I prioritize? And then putting in the rule sets in place to be able to live to those. I think there's that. Like I said, I'm looking for tips on how to be better in some of the other categories of like, I would love to be better about working out and going to bed early, even with my early schedule. That still is something is a challenge for me. And so, always looking for tips and for ways to be better because it's hard. It's not easy, but I think what it comes down to for me is like, and this is what I would say, it's easier, I think, to cope with these things if you're doing something you love. And I'm fortunate to be able to say that. I know many people aren't, but I hope it inspires people to go chase their dreams. Because literally, I say this every week, and my partner and I literally talked about this morning of like, we get to do something that we absolutely dreamed about and get to, build something we care about and get to get paid to do it. Like, how lucky is that? And so through all of it, I may be an advocate more of like, honestly, there's, through all of those stuff, I just want to tell myself how fortunate and how blessed I am. And that helps. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the answer to your question. There's a long-winded answer, but it's like, I'm so grateful for the things that I have and the things I get to do. And telling myself that has been a huge, blessing for me and my mental health.
And even for people who don't maybe love what they're doing right now, they probably love certain aspects about what they're doing. Or
there's always the bright side of, everything.
Exactly.
Find the silver lining. And I think it's shown, you would know better than I would, but I think it's shown, right? Expressing gratitude is, has a positive impact on your psyche.
100%. Yeah. It's one of the best things we can do, actually, just to turn your focus to the things that you're grateful for. So, well, this has been awesome, Eric. I really appreciate you coming in and talking about this, sharing your just your counsel, and also this idea of chasing your dreams too. I think that's awesome. And the blessing that you've been to all these people, these thousands of people, that's a legacy. That's pretty cool.
Well, it's just the beginning. The reason I'm working so hard and trying to put in long hours is because I think this is just the start. We want to do big things. So thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thanks everyone for listening today. We want to keep the mental health conversation going, and as we find ways to improve. Change starts with each one of us, so never underestimate your potential. We invite you to tune in frequently for engaging guests, beneficial discussions, and more solutions to help you increase your mental health momentum.